The unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect truth is seldom met with, even in 100,000 myriad kalpas. Now we can see and hear it. We can remember and accept it. I vow to make the Buddha's truth one with myself. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Good to have you all here on this snowy, wintry day. And we've just celebrated our yearly festival memorial on the anniversary of Reverend Master Jiu's death, her passing into eternal meditation 24 years plus 2 days ago. And we've had the opportunity to express our gratitude for her deep wisdom and compassion, her unshakable faith and devotion to the way of the Buddha, as the offertory that we've just heard states. And I might add, with great courage. When I thought about her in preparing this talk, I increasingly realized the courage that it took for her to go to the Far East on her own, practice in an all-male temple, and then come back and start a monastery with a lot of young green trainees. And we're so grateful that she did that. And when I reflected also further on her, the other thing that came up was her great sense of humor, which I think hopefully we can continue in this time, these challenging times, to keep our that magnanimous sense of humor that she had. As one of her disciples, and having had the privilege of training with her, which of course is still ongoing, I thought to offer some encouraging words and teachings from Reverend Master that have been particularly significant to me, and I believe very relevant to all that we're going through together in our world at this time. The offertory for this ceremony also says, which is common to many dedications in Soto Zen Buddhist liturgy, it begins with, "The Dharma body of the Buddha cannot be seen so long as one is within duality. For it is beyond birth and death, filling all things." And this is what I wanted to touch on a little bit today. One of the first things when I thought of which of her teachings I should go into today, of course there was a flood of memories, but what came up foremost, something that perhaps I've talked about quite a bit recently and touched on at a recent Saturday talk as well, and that is her injunction to be content and to not create opposites where they do not exist. And she said that quite forcefully, at least I heard it very forcefully at one point in my life that really helped turn things around for me. Now in the past I've given a couple of talks that I've called Gateways That Lead to the Path of Liberation. The first one being meditation, specifically the practice of bringing one's mind to the present, to whatever's in front of us right now, to really the flow of our life as it is, without adding anything. The second gateway was harmonizing one's life, our body, our actions, speech, and mind with the precepts. And the practice of going beyond the opposites is the third gateway into liberation. We practice all of these three in Buddhist training, and any one of them really puts us on the path to true spiritual liberation, true freedom and peace of heart and mind. Great Master Dogen emphasizes, as you may recall in his Rules for Meditation, that when the opposites arise, we have almost lost the way to salvation. In other words, we lose sight of the Dharma body of the Buddha, as was said this morning, and get trapped in a painful duality. One way that he expresses this in his chapter on Bendoa, which means on doing one's utmost in practicing the way of the Buddhas, He says, as I would now explain it, diligently practicing the way means letting all things be what they are in their self-nature. That's capitalized. Or you might say Buddha nature. As you put your essential oneness into operation by following the road away from discriminatory and dualistic thinking. So following this road, which we all have an intuitive sense of. He says further, when you have abandoned that type of thinking and have thus passed beyond its barriers, you will cease to be affected by its explanations, or we might say rationalizations, which, like the nodes in bamboo, block free passage, or by its theories, mere intellectual speculation, which are as convoluted as the knots in a piece of pine wood, i.e., as I understand it, not bunging up our pipe, our connection with Buddha nature and the heart of all things and beings. This to me is finding true wisdom, grounded in compassion. So let's look a little more closely at what the great masters, and they all seem to say something about this, going beyond good and evil, going beyond the opposites. What they mean by this teaching. Does it mean we don't think for ourselves? Of course not. But how do we practice this? If we just observe what our minds have been doing this last week, it might become immediately apparent, at least to me, that as human beings, we're very prone to pitting one thing or experience or person or ideal against another. This impulse seems to be one of the ways that fundamental ignorance of our Buddha nature, in other words, our human karmic tendency toward greed, anger, and delusion or confusion, how it plays out. So it's something to keep an eye on. It can seem normal to the worldly mind to think if one thing is right, another must be wrong. Or if you prefer one thing, you don't want the other. This whole business of liking and disliking, which has become very strong on the internet, of course it has its practical good uses, and it can really get out of whack and cause us to close off to a whole big part of humanity and the Buddha nature that will cause great sadness and disappointment in the long run. So again, it doesn't mean that we don't make decisions. We can't, that we're just going along with, we're removed somehow from real life. It's quite the opposite. To my mind, wise discernment, the ability to discern wisely and compassionately, comes out of this practice of going beyond the opposites, of being still when we get caught in that tension where we're pulled by opposites. And we find that our decisions come from a more wholesome, a deeper place, our true heart, the Buddha nature as we often refer to it. Here's one of the ways that Reverend Master Gio expressed something of this teaching, different avenues into this teaching. I'm going to quote from Volume 2 of Roar of the Tigress, her commentaries on some of her Dharma talks years ago on Great Master Dogen's Shobogenzo. And here she's commenting on the Genjo Koan, one of the early chapters of the Shobogenzo, which Reverend Hubert translated as the spiritual question as it manifests before your very eyes. And the chapter is called All is One and All is Different. And I wanted to give you some of her words because they will speak more clearly about her encouraging teaching. Here we're quoting Great Master Dogen in the Genjo Koan. He says, in that period of time when Buddhas give voice to the teachings on existence, in all its variety, there is talk of delusion and enlightenment, of practice and training, of birth, of death, of Buddhas, of ordinary beings. In that period of time, when it is no longer relevant to speak of an I, in quotes, along with its whole universe, in quotes, there is no delusion or enlightenment, no Buddhas or ordinary beings, no being born, no extinction. So here's Reverend Master Jiyu commenting. When there is Buddhism, there is diversification. All things are seen to be unique in their differences. When you find that which is true, none of these things exist. Thus, the way of the Buddha includes and also transcends both unity and individuality, which I have sometimes expressed as all is one and, underlined, all is different. Do not remain forever within dualistic individuality, for you will never know the unity. And do not try to stay within the unity, for you will not know the fullness of truth. Know that you must go beyond both. Too often we look down upon the differences and idealize the unity. What we are speaking of in this chapter lies beyond both of them, yet embraces them. We may call it the truth, we may call it immaculacy, we may call it that which we know within ourselves, but all of these names are wrong. All is one, yes, and you may see it within the all is different. And I'm skipping over some of Great Master Dogen's text just to do a little more of her commentary here. All things in their diversity are signs of the truth. All are part of the truth. And it is the diversity which brings us to religious training. But if we get caught up with liking or disliking, then we are very far away from the truth. And isms exist. You have to accept things as they are. That is why all acceptance is the key to the gateless gate of Zen. When we say, in quotes, I am doing this, as opposed to allowing Buddha nature, which is within, to do all, then we are deluded. I do nothing of myself, but the Buddhas and ancestors, which taught me earlier in the form of my own master, may act through me, and which we are being taught through the Buddha's teachings and all those who have passed it on to us. Be very careful when the certainty of realization comes to you. Be very careful of becoming God in your own mind. Encouraging words, which I think we all need to learn how to build harmony amongst ourselves, beginning with the Sangha and spreading outwards. So just to complete her commentary here, so she says, we start off in training from the place of the old I, which is the selfish, all is different, of duality. In the course of training with this I, we find the new I, of the all is one. Then we must let go even of this to find the with, which is the new all is different. Of all is one and all is different. If one fails to realize both the I and the with, one sees with only one eye. That's EYE. Our vision is obscured. Because if you cannot understand that the with, the new all is different, is also the whole of Buddhahood, you are not going to see the Buddha in the person, the bum, the drunk. You can fill in the blank here, whoever you might find you feel you have to reject or feel an aversion towards. You're not going to see the Buddha in this person who walks through the door or comes onto your television set, your phone, or whatever. And what you will say is, how can such a person be a Buddha? If you are stuck with the new I, all that you can see is a Buddha, and because you refuse to discern the aspects of how he or she is being a person that you're averse to, then you cannot help them. If you see a Buddha who happens to be drunk or doing something wrong, then all things can teach and enlighten you. One thing that a master finds out is that every single creature or person who walks through his or her door is a teacher. If he does it by any other means, then he or she is in great trouble and likely to become God in their own head. This is why I have pointed out, she says, on many occasions, that I lose nothing whatsoever by taking advice from other people or by asking their help. They can teach me. If you suffer from the idea that you know, in quotes, and nothing can teach you, then the Buddhas can't help you. These were some of the words that she gave me at the time of my transmission, and also good teaching for anyone who's a guest master in a monastery, but for all of us. This teaching has come to me very strongly at times when I've gone through rough patches in my training, perhaps having made some mistakes or broken a precept or in some way gone against my true heart's wish, or perhaps things just hadn't worked out the way I thought they should, or I thought they would. Times when I've suffered deep disappointment. And I have learned that when I get stuck in the opposites, there is this very deep disappointment. And fortunately, that has been healing itself over the years through training. But it's good to watch out for disappointment and to trace where that comes from. I found that my mind was clinging, and this is one of the ways the opposites can appear. My mind kept clinging to an ideal, and I would find myself stuck in a duality of how things actually were versus, or seemed, versus how they should have been. Perfectionism, can be an aspect of this, getting stuck with having to have things our way, perhaps, or even just perfect by worldly standards. Reverend Master helped me to see that I was clinging to something that was unreal, passing, ultimately dissatisfying. The ideal and the actual didn't, in reality, stand against each other, just as the all is one and the all is different don't ultimately stand against each other. I realized that my suffering was caused by my mind's tendency to want something else, rather than accepting what was and is, and going forward from that point on. So being content, in the context that she mentions it, meant being still with the suffering or the dissatisfaction, the discontent I was experiencing, with that pull into the tension of opposites and judgments. They seem to go together. And being willing to take refuge in a different way, in what Reverend Master often called the third position. Doing that gradually opened a door for me that shed light on opportunities and possibilities for growth, peace, and freedom, real freedom, that were being presented to me. And these opportunities are being presented to us all the time, but we tend to block them out when we get stuck in the opposites, which is why Dogen says we've almost lost the way to salvation when we get stuck there. When we let go of the discriminatory mind, judgmental thinking is one way to think about it, and stop creating opposites where they don't exist in reality, everything begins to become useful in our training. The ideal and the actual become like a box, all with its lid, as the Sandokai scripture says. We are no longer tossed about by right and wrong, good and evil, liking and disliking, the 8 winds, as we so often talk about, praise and ridicule. That's one of the hardest ones, isn't it? Gain and loss, and so on. Our Buddha nature makes use of everything if we just listen, sit still, and let it do its work. And be patient with this process. When we witness something that is good, wholesome, we can put it into practice. When we see something that seems wrong, evil, not good, we can also benefit from its teaching, which is that this is an example of what not to do. So there's a continuum there, sometimes called the jade thread of Buddha nature, that runs through everything without obstruction. We don't have to put up roadblocks. We can learn to drop them, to let them go, let them fall away. And this, in my experience, eventually brings us to true freedom of heart, of mind. Helps us to understand our lives more as a spiritual journey, the whole purpose of our lives being a spiritual journey, and nothing is wasted along the way. The Buddha nature is there within everything, even our worst mistakes. So I'll just give you another quote of Reverend Masters, if I may, to help us, encourage us along the way. This is from How to Grow a Lotus Blossom, or How a Zen Buddhist Prepares for Death, the book that she really comes out of her diary many years ago when she was very, very ill and thought she might be dying. Here she says, to live beyond duality may seem cold to the dualistic mind. I can assure such a mind that to live beyond the opposites is anything but cold. To bathe in the Lord's fountain, and she refers to the Lord of the house, which can be understood as the eternal, the third position, the Buddha nature. To bathe in the Lord's fountain is to be washed thoroughly and intimately with pure love. To live beyond the opposites is to know that no matter what a being has done in the past, he or she is and always was immaculate. Living beyond the opposites eliminates the problem of labels that the world puts on others. It is knowing that he or she, whom the world labels a criminal, is immaculate in the sight of the Lord. It is knowing that she, whom the world or he dubs a prostitute, has equal rights with the head of state before the Lord of the house. They are not the Lord, and the Lord is all of them. For centuries, we have usurped the Lord's prerogative, setting up our petty opinions. Still, the Lord waits in all-embracing silence. Who can fathom such love? She says, I bathed in the Lord's fountain, and I cannot even conceive of the depth of that love. I cannot, excuse me. I can only tell others of it and hope and pray that they may know it too before they die. I'll leave you with that very profound teaching, and it shows you something of her deep wisdom, love, and compassion. And encourage us all to go forward, stepping beyond the opposites with faith and courage, and just doing our very best with what's in front of us. Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha.